My name is Robert Sullivan. I'm 62 years old, and for 3 decades I worked as a civil engineer building bridges that connected entire communities. I lost my wife Margaret 3 years ago to cancer that caught us completely off guard. Since then, my daughter Sarah has been trying to take care of me in a way that makes me feel more like a burden than a father. But the story I need to tell happened on a weekend in October 2023 when I discovered just how much I had become a prisoner of my own family. It was a sunny Friday when I decided to drive to our villa at Lake Serenity in Vermont. Margaret and I bought that property in 1998, when Sarah was only 15 years old. We spent the best summers of our lives in that place. Barbecues on the porch, boat rides at sunset, late nights playing cards. After Margaret passed away, the villa became my refuge, the only place where I could still feel her presence in a comforting way. That morning, I packed my bag with my usual care: comfortable clothes, some books that Margaret had recommended years ago that I had never finished, and a bottle of red wine we used to share on autumn evenings. The 2.5-hour drive from Boston always calmed me, especially when the leaves began to change color, creating a golden and red carpet along the secondary roads. When I turned into the familiar entrance of the property, I immediately noticed something was wrong. There were 2 cars parked in the covered garage: Sarah's blue Honda Civic and a silver SUV that I recognized as belonging to her husband, David. My heart began to beat faster, not with joy, but with a strange apprehension. Sarah hadn't mentioned anything about coming to the villa that weekend when we talked the previous Tuesday. I parked my Buick sedan next to the garage and walked to the main entrance carrying my small travel bag. The living room curtains were closed, something Margaret and I never did during the day. We always liked natural light to illuminate our lake house. I rang the doorbell and waited, hearing muffled voices inside that seemed to be discussing something. The door opened abruptly, and David appeared wearing only shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt. His hair was messy, as if he had just woken up, even though it was almost 2 in the afternoon. The smell of beer on his breath was unmistakable, and his eyes had that glassy appearance of someone who had drunk beyond measure. "What are you doing here?" he asked without even greeting me, blocking the entrance with his body. "Sorry, David, but this is my house," I replied calmly, trying to maintain composure in the face of inexplicable rudeness. "I came to spend the weekend, as I always do." "Sarah!" he shouted over his shoulder. "Your father is here!" I heard my daughter's hurried footsteps coming down the wooden stairs that I had helped install 20 years ago. When she appeared at the door wearing a bathrobe that I recognized as Margaret's, I felt a tightness in my chest that I couldn't disguise. "Dad, it's not a good time," Sarah said, crossing her arms defensively. "David and I decided to spend some time here to reconnect our relationship. You can't stay." I stood there for a few seconds, processing what I had just heard. In 32 years of marriage, Margaret and I had never expelled our daughter from our home, regardless of circumstances. The villa had always been a place of family unity, not exclusion. "Sarah, dear, I don't understand. This is my property, and I drove 2.5 hours to get here. Surely we can share the house as we always have?" "No, Dad. We got here first and we need privacy. You can go back to Boston or go to a hotel in town. We don't want to be disturbed." David nodded vigorously behind her, like a guard dog protecting his territory. "Exactly. We reserved this weekend for ourselves. You can come back next week." The shock of the situation left me momentarily speechless. I looked at my daughter, searching for some sign of the sweet girl who had grown up in that house, who had built doll houses in the backyard and helped me plant the vegetable garden that Margaret loved so much. But the woman before me seemed like a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Sarah, your mother would be deeply saddened to see you treating me this way," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. For a moment, I saw something like remorse pass through her eyes, but David quickly placed his hand on her shoulder, and her expression hardened again. "Don't bring Mom into this conversation. She's not here anymore, and you need to accept that things have changed. We don't want you here this weekend. Period." I stood there on the porch I had built myself, holding my suitcase and feeling as if the ground was disappearing beneath my feet. In the distance, I could hear the gentle sound of lake waves hitting against the pier where Margaret and I used to sit to watch the sunset. The contrast between the serene beauty of the place and the coldness of the situation was almost surreal. "All right," I finally murmured. "I'll leave." I turned and walked back to my car, each step weighing like lead. I could hear the door closing behind me with a definitive sound that echoed through the crisp autumn air. I put my suitcase in the back seat and sat behind the wheel, but couldn't start the engine immediately. My hands were shaking, and a mixture of sadness and indignation was beginning to boil inside my chest. During the drive back to Boston, I tried to understand what had happened. Sarah had always been a loving daughter, Perhaps a little spoiled, but never cruel. After Margaret died, she had assumed a caregiver role that initially seemed comforting to me, but gradually became more controlling. She had opinions about my finances, my diet, my social activities, always with the excuse of being worried about me. But what happened that day at the villa was different. It was direct disrespect, a demonstration of power that made me realize how much I had allowed our dynamic to deteriorate over the past 3 years. Margaret had always kept Sarah in line when she showed selfish tendencies. Without her balancing influence, our daughter seemed to have developed a sense of entitlement over my life and possessions that left me deeply disturbed. When I arrived at my apartment in Boston, I immediately called my best friend Tom Bradley, who had known our family for decades. I told him what had happened, and the silence on the other end of the line was more eloquent than any words. "Bob," he finally said, "I think you need to establish some clear boundaries with Sarah. What she did today was unacceptable." That night, alone in my apartment, I looked at Margaret's photo on my nightstand and whispered a silent promise that I would no longer allow our daughter to disrespect the memory of our love and the dignity of our home. 3 days passed before Sarah called. I was having my breakfast on Tuesday when the phone rang. I immediately recognized her number on the screen, but part of me hesitated before answering. Since the incident at the villa, I had spent a lot of time reflecting on our relationship, and some uncomfortable truths were beginning to emerge. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded strangely cheerful, as if nothing had happened the previous weekend. "How are you?" "I'm fine, Sarah," I replied cautiously. "And you? How was the rest of your weekend at the villa?" "Oh, it was exactly what David and I needed. By the way, I need to talk to you about an important decision we made." I felt a chill in my stomach. Her tone had changed subtly, acquiring that artificial quality I had learned to recognize when she was about to communicate something she had already decided without my participation. "What kind of decision, dear?" "Well, David and I talked a lot during the weekend, and we came to the conclusion that it would be better for everyone if we donated the villa to his parents. They're getting older and could really enjoy a place like that to retire." For a moment, I thought I had heard wrong. I placed the coffee cup on the table so carefully that the sound of porcelain touching wood seemed amplified in the silence that followed. "Sorry, Sarah, but I don't think I understood correctly. Did you say donate the villa?" "Yes. Dad, we want you to sign the papers transferring the property to David's parents. They're wonderful people and will take very good care of the house. Besides, you're single now and don't really need such a big house. Your Boston apartment is much more practical for your needs." The audacity of the statement left me momentarily speechless. I took a deep breath, trying to process not only what she was proposing, but the casual way she was proposing it, as if she were discussing what to do with old furniture. "Sarah, the villa isn't mine to donate to strangers. It's our family home, where you grew up, where your mother and I built decades of memories. Besides, it's my legal property." "Dad, you're being too sentimental. Mom isn't here anymore to enjoy the house, and you rarely use it. It's a waste to keep it just for yourself. David's parents would use it much more." Blood began to boil in my veins. For 3 years, I had swallowed condescending comments, decisions made for my own good, and a growing sense that my opinion mattered less and less in my own life. But this had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. "Sarah, listen very carefully. I will not donate, sell, or transfer the villa to anyone. It's my property, bought with money I earned during decades of hard work, and where I intend to continue spending my weekends for as long as I want." The silence on the other end of the line was different this time. It wasn't the silence of reflection, but of surprise. Sarah clearly didn't expect resistance. "Dad, you're being irrational. We're your family, and we're trying to do what's best for everyone. You can't be so selfish." "Selfish?" The word came out louder than I intended. "Sarah, how is it selfish of me to want to keep my own house? How is it irrational to want to preserve the place where I built the best memories with your mother? Because you're an old and lonely man who clings to things from the past. You need to accept that your life has changed and that other people could benefit more from that property than you." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Old and lonely. Is that how my own daughter saw me? As a burden who should give up his possessions to accommodate her and her husband's whims? "Besides," she continued, interpreting my silence as an opportunity to press further, "from now on, I prefer that you don't go to the villa anymore without letting us know first. We need our space, and your presence there has been uncomfortable." That was the last straw. For 3 years, I had allowed Sarah to gradually assume control over aspects of my life, always under the pretense of taking care of me after Margaret's death. But this wasn't care, it was pure and simple manipulation. "Sarah," I said, my voice taking on a tone I hadn't used in years. "You are forbidden from going to the villa until further notice. And if I find out that you or David are using my property without permission again, I will call the police." The silence now was deafening. "You can't do that," she finally exploded. "We're your family. You can't forbid us from using the family house." "I can, and I am doing it. The villa is my legal property, registered only in my name. Your mother and I never put your name on the deed because we wanted to maintain control over it during our lifetimes. Now I understand why. Dad, you're making a terrible mistake. You're going to regret this." The line went dead. Sarah had hung up, leaving me alone with the echo of her threatening words. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel intimidated. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, the satisfaction of defending my own dignity. That night, sitting in my brown leather armchair that Margaret had chosen for my study, I began to truly process what had happened. For the first time in 3 years, I had said no to Sarah categorically, and the feeling was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. I picked up my notebook, a habit I had maintained since my engineering days, and began writing a list of all the moments in recent years when Sarah had made decisions for me or pressured me to do things I didn't really want to do. The list grew quickly. She had convinced me to cancel a cruise I had planned with Tom because she thought it was dangerous for men our age, insisted I sell my sports car because it was reckless, made me change doctors 3 times because she didn't trust the professionals I chose. The pattern was clear now. Since Margaret's death, Sarah had systematically taken control of my life, always using concern and love as excuses. And I, in my grief and loneliness, had allowed it, even felt grateful for the attention. But the conversation about the villa had revealed her true intentions. It wasn't care. It was control. And possibly greed. The next morning, I called Harold Mitchell, my lawyer for more than 15 years. Harold had handled all the legal aspects of buying the villa and knew my family situation well. "Bob, good to hear your voice," he said when his secretary put me through to him. "What can I do for you?" I explained the situation with Sarah, from the expulsion from the villa to the demand that I donate it to her in-laws. Harold listened in silence, asking occasional questions to clarify details. "Bob, I need to be direct with you. Sarah has no legal right to the villa while you're alive. The property is registered exclusively in your name, and any transfer would require your voluntary signature. She cannot force you to donate or sell." "But what if something happens to me? If I have some health problem or—" I began to ask. But Harold interrupted me. "That's why it's important to protect your interests now. I'll prepare some documents that guarantee your will is respected, regardless of circumstances. I also recommend we consider a very specific and limited power of attorney, in case you need help in the future, but that doesn't give Sarah total power." We scheduled a meeting for the following Friday. For the first time in years, I felt I was regaining control over my own life. That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months: visit my neighbor at Lake Serenity. Marcus Chen was a 42-year-old man who had moved to the property next to ours 2 years ago. He worked remotely as a residential security systems specialist and had always been friendly, though he respected our privacy. I drove to Vermont with a specific purpose in mind. If Sarah and David were determined to use my property without permission, I needed to take measures to protect it, and Marcus seemed to be exactly the person who could help me. I found Marcus working in his yard, installing what appeared to be a new outdoor lighting system. He greeted me warmly and invited me for coffee on his porch, which offered a spectacular view of the lake. "How are you, Bob? I haven't seen you in a few weeks," he said, serving fresh coffee in blue ceramic mugs. "To be honest, Marcus, I'm going through some family problems and came looking for your professional advice." I explained the situation with Sarah and David, omitting some of the more painful details, but making it clear that they had invaded my property and planned to do it again. Marcus listened attentively, asking occasional technical questions. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and smiled in a way that made me feel I was about to hear exactly what I needed. "Bob, what you're describing is a very common problem. Vacation properties are frequently targets of family members who think they have a right to them. The good news is that modern technology offers very effective solutions for dealing with trespassers, even when those trespassers are relatives." He took me to his home office, which was equipped with multiple monitors showing different angles of his property. "This is my personal setup, but I can create something similar for your villa. Cameras, motion sensors, alarm systems, remote light control, and even water systems." "Water systems?" I asked, intrigued. Oh, yes, I can program faucets, showers, irrigation systems to activate automatically when they detect unauthorized movement. It's completely legal because it's your property, and it can be very persuasive. Marcus began sketching a plan in a notebook. What I propose is creating an automated welcome system for unwanted visitors. Nothing that causes physical harm, of course, but definitely something that makes the experience extremely uncomfortable. We spent the next 2 hours discussing possibilities. Marcus explained how he could install motion sensors at strategic points in the house, programmed to ignore my presence through a special bracelet I would wear, but that would activate immediately in the presence of anyone else. I can set up strobe lights in all rooms, connected to speakers that will play random sounds, whispering voices, animal noises, loud music. I can also program the water system to gush from all faucets, showers, and even the garden irrigation system. The genius of the plan began to become clear. And this is all legal. Completely. It's your property, your systems, your resources. You have the right to configure your house the way you want. If unauthorized visitors get uncomfortable with your choices of decoration and home operation, well, they can always leave. Marcus smiled mischievously. I can also add some simple holographic projections, shadows moving across walls, silhouettes in windows. Nothing that causes real damage, but definitely scary in the middle of the night. I felt an excitement I hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't destructive revenge I was seeking, but an intelligent and legal way to protect my property and my dignity. How long would it take to install all this? With the right materials and working on weekends, about 3 weeks. I can start next Saturday if you're interested. Marcus, I'm more than interested. I'm fascinated. We spent the rest of the afternoon refining the details. Marcus explained that all systems would be controlled by an app on my phone, allowing me to monitor the property and activate or deactivate specific systems remotely. He would also install discrete cameras that would allow me to watch everything in real time. The beauty of the system, he explained, is that I can program it to activate only during certain hours or when it detects multiple people. If you're alone in the house, nothing happens. But if it detects a group or activity during specific hours you define as suspicious, the show begins. When I returned to Boston that night, I felt energized in a way I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since Margaret's death, I had an exciting project ahead of me, something that required creativity and strategic planning. On Friday, my meeting with Harold Mitchell was even more productive than I had expected. He had prepared a series of documents that completely protected my interests. Bob, by signing these papers, you're guaranteeing that Sarah cannot make decisions about your property or your finances, even if you become temporarily incapacitated. I'm also recommending that you consider establishing a trust for the villa. A trust? Yes. You would transfer the property to a trust of which you would be the sole beneficiary during your lifetime. This would protect the villa from any attempt at legal manipulation and ensure that your instructions about who should inherit it are followed exactly. Harold explained that with a trust, I would maintain total control over the property while I lived, but could specify exactly what would happen to it after my death. You could leave it to a charitable institution, a friend, or even sell it and donate the money. Sarah would have no automatic right to it. The idea pleased me immensely. How long would it take to establish this? 2 weeks maximum. And I can include specific clauses about who has permission to use the property during your lifetime. I left Harold's office feeling that I was, for the first time in years, truly in control of my own life. I had a legal plan to protect my assets and a technological plan to protect my property from invaders. That weekend, Marcus and I began the first phase of installation. He arrived at the villa Saturday morning with a van full of equipment that looked like it came from a science fiction movie. First thing we're going to do is install the cameras, he explained, unloading a box of small, discrete devices. 6 inside the house, 4 outside, all with night vision and motion detection. We spent the day installing cameras at strategic points: living room, kitchen, main bedrooms, and at the property entrances. Marcus worked with the precision of a surgeon, hiding wires inside walls and making sure no equipment was visible to the naked eye. The key is to make everything look normal, he explained while adjusting a microscopic camera behind a painting in the living room. If Sarah and David come back, they can't suspect anything until it's too late. On Sunday, we installed motion sensors in all rooms. Marcus programmed them to completely ignore my presence when I wore a special radio frequency identification bracelet, but to detect anyone else immediately. The system is smart enough to distinguish between one person moving normally and multiple people, he explained. If it detects more than one person in the house, or movement during hours you define as suspicious, It activates immediately. While Marcus worked on programming, I tested the app on my phone. The interface was surprisingly simple. I could see all cameras simultaneously, receive movement alerts, and control all house systems with simple screen touches. Next week, I'll install the light and sound systems, Marcus said as he put away his tools. And the week after, we'll finish with the water systems and special projections. When he left Sunday afternoon, I was alone in the villa for the first time in weeks. But I didn't feel lonely. Instead, I felt an exciting anticipation. My house was transforming into a technological fortress, and I was in command of everything. The second week of installation was even more impressive than the first. Marcus arrived Saturday morning with equipment that looked like it came from a futuristic tech show. His van was loaded with programmable LED lights, miniaturized speakers, and devices I didn't even know existed. "Today we're going to transform your house into a complete sensory experience," he said with an enthusiastic smile while unloading boxes labeled with technical terms I didn't fully understand. We started by installing the strobe lights. Marcus placed ultra-bright LED units in each room, hidden behind furniture and inside existing fixtures. When activated, these lights flash at specific frequencies designed to cause maximum disorientation without causing permanent physical damage, he explained, adjusting a unit behind the living room sofa. "Is it safe?" I asked, suddenly concerned about legal implications. "Completely. The frequencies are the same ones used in nightclubs and electronic music shows. Uncomfortable and disorienting, but not dangerous. And I can program them to work in bursts of a few seconds, which minimizes any risk." Next, we installed the sound system. Marcus placed tiny speakers in each room, connected to a central system that could play different sounds simultaneously. I can program whispering voices, animal noises, loud music, even recordings of yourself saying specific things. The idea of the recordings intrigued me. What kind of things should I record? Well, imagine Sarah and David arriving at the house in the middle of the night and hearing your voice coming from the walls saying things like, "Why are you in my house?" or "You are not welcome here." It would be quite disturbing. We spent an hour recording various phrases in my voice. Some were direct and accusatory, others were more subtle and psychologically disturbing. Marcus edited them on his laptop, adding echo and distortion effects that made my own voice sound ghostly. The system can play these recordings randomly, mixed with other sounds. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night and hearing the homeowner's voice echoing through the corridors while lights flash and water gushes from all faucets. Programming the water systems was perhaps the most creative part of the project. Marcus connected all faucets, showers, and the garden irrigation system to electronically controlled valves. When the system detects intruders, it can activate any combination of these systems simultaneously. We tested the system with Marcus simulating an intruder while I monitored everything through the app on my phone. When he entered the house without my identification bracelet, the result was spectacular. All kitchen faucets opened simultaneously, showers began gushing water at maximum pressure, and the garden irrigation system activated, creating actual water curtains outside all windows. "Imagine waking up with this happening around you," Marcus said, laughing as he turned off the system. "The feeling would be that the house itself is attacking you." On Sunday, we installed the holographic projectors. These were small, discrete devices that could project moving shadows and silhouettes on walls and windows. Marcus positioned them strategically to create the illusion that there were people moving through the house, even when it was empty. "This is the finishing touch," he explained, adjusting a projector behind a curtain. The projections are programmed to move irregularly, creating shadows that look like human figures walking through corridors or passing by windows. We tested the projections with the lights off, and the effect was genuinely disturbing. Undefined silhouettes moved across walls, appearing and disappearing in unpredictable patterns. Even knowing they were projections, I felt a chill seeing them. The combination of all systems working simultaneously will be psychologically devastating, Marcus explained. Strobe lights, gushing water, your voice echoing through walls, and shadows moving everywhere. Any normal person would run away within minutes. When we finished the basic installation that weekend, Marcus showed me how to control everything through the app. The interface was incredibly intuitive. I could activate individual systems or set up complete scenarios with a single touch. "Look," he said, guiding me through the app. "Here you can set specific times for automatic activation. For example, if you want the system to activate automatically between midnight and 6 in the morning when it detects movement, just program it here." The app also allowed me to watch cameras in real time, receive instant alerts when movement was detected, and even record videos of events for later review. During the third week, Marcus returned for the final installations. This time, He brought backup batteries and emergency power systems. The last thing we want is for Sarah and David to arrive during a power outage and not have to face our welcome system, he said, installing powerful battery units in the house's basement. The batteries were designed to keep all systems running for up to 12 hours without electricity. Marcus also installed discrete solar panels on the roof, ensuring that batteries could be recharged indefinitely. Now your house is completely autonomous, he explained proudly. Even if they cut the main electrical power, all systems will continue functioning normally. The final installation included door and window sensors that would detect any attempt at forced entry. If someone tries to break down a door or break a window, the system will activate immediately in maximum mode, all systems working simultaneously. Marcus also added a functionality he called escalation mode. The system starts gentle, maybe just some lights flashing and a voice or two. But if the intruders don't leave within 5 minutes, it escalates to level 2. Water systems activate. If they're still there after 10 minutes, it goes to maximum. Everything at once. He demonstrated the escalation mode, showing me how I could also override it and go straight to maximum intensity if I wanted. Sometimes you don't want to give people a chance to get comfortable. Sometimes you want immediate, overwhelming psychological impact. The final touch was what Marcus called the nightmare mode. This was a special setting that combined all systems in the most psychologically disturbing way possible. Strobe lights at frequencies that cause maximum discomfort, your voice recordings played backwards and distorted, water systems creating flooding conditions, and shadow projections moving in patterns designed to trigger primal fears. I've only used this mode twice in my career, Marcus admitted. Both times, the intruders were out of the house within 3 minutes and never came back. When everything was finally installed and tested, I stood in my transformed villa feeling a mixture of pride and anticipation. The house looked exactly the same as always, but it was now a technological fortress capable of psychological warfare. Remember, Marcus said as he packed up his final tools, the beauty of this system is that it's completely legal. You're not harming anyone physically, just making them extremely uncomfortable in your own home. And everything is controlled by you, so you can activate or deactivate anything at any time. He handed me a detailed manual and a backup phone with the app installed. I recommend keeping this backup phone hidden somewhere safe, in case your primary phone is damaged or lost. The system can also be controlled from any internet connection worldwide, so you could be in Boston and still manage everything here. That evening, alone in the villa, I walked through each room one last time, marveling at how normal everything looked while knowing the sophisticated technology hidden beneath the surface. I thought about Margaret and how she would have reacted to this elaborate plan. Part of me thought she would have been proud of my ingenuity, while another part wondered if she would have encouraged me to take a different approach. But as I sat on our old porch swing, watching the sunset over Lake Serenity, I realized that what I had built wasn't just a security system. It was a declaration of independence. For 3 years, I had allowed myself to be pushed around, manipulated, and treated like a burden. Now, I had the tools to defend not just my property, but my dignity. The waiting began. I knew Sarah and David would eventually try to use the villa again, probably assuming that our last conversation had been just a temporary argument that would blow over. They had no idea what awaited them. 3 weeks had passed since my last conversation with Sarah when I received the notification that would change everything. I was in my Boston apartment reading the evening news when my phone buzzed with an alert from the villa's security system. The app showed movement detected in the driveway at 6:47 p.m. on a Friday evening. I opened the camera feed and felt my pulse quicken. There they were, Sarah's blue Honda Civic and David's silver SUV, plus a third car I didn't recognize, a dark sedan that must belong to David's parents. They were actually doing it. They were treating my property as if it were already theirs. Through the high-definition cameras, I watched as 5 people got out of the cars. Sarah and David looked relaxed and confident, clearly believing they had every right to be there. Behind them emerged an older couple, David's parents, I assumed, looking around appreciatively at the lake view and the well-maintained property. The 5th person was a younger woman I didn't recognize, possibly David's sister. I watched with fascination as David produced a key from his pocket. My blood ran cold as I realized they must have made a copy during their previous unauthorized visit. The casual way he unlocked my door, as if he owned the place, filled me with a rage I hadn't felt in years. "Welcome to your new retirement home," I heard David say to his parents through the audio system Marcus had installed. His voice was clear and confident, the voice of a man who believed he had just handed his parents a substantial gift that wasn't his to give. Sarah was playing the gracious hostess, showing them around the living room and pointing out features of the house. "The view from the master bedroom is incredible," she was saying. And the kitchen was completely renovated just 5 years ago. I watched them for nearly an hour, my anger building with each passing minute. They were dividing up my possessions, discussing which furniture they would keep and what they would change. David's mother was already making plans for the garden, talking about planting roses where Margaret's herb garden had flourished. The most infuriating moment came when David's father suggested they should do something nice for me to make up for taking the house. They were discussing my own property as if I were already dead, as if my feelings and wishes were completely irrelevant. At 11:30 p.m., I watched them all settle into their respective bedrooms. Sarah and David took the master bedroom, my and Margaret's room. David's parents were in the guest room, and the younger woman was on the living room couch. They had made themselves completely at home, confident that they had won some sort of victory. I waited until midnight, then activated the system. I started with escalation mode, wanting to see how they would react to a gradual increase in intensity. At 12:01 a.m., I activated level 1. The response was immediate and beautiful. The bedroom lights began flashing in random patterns. Not the full strobe effect yet, just enough to wake them up and create confusion. Simultaneously, the sound system began playing subtle background noises, whispers in the walls, the sound of footsteps in empty rooms, doors creaking. Through the cameras, I watched Sarah sit up in bed, shaking David awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. David looked around groggily, clearly disoriented by the flashing lights. In the guest room, David's parents were also stirring. His mother was clinging to her husband, pointing at the lights flickering in their room. The young woman in the living room was sitting up on the couch, looking around in confusion. "It's probably just an electrical problem," David said loudly, trying to project confidence. But I could see the uncertainty in his eyes as he got out of bed and walked to the light switch. No matter how many times he flipped it, the random flashing continued. After 5 minutes, the system automatically escalated to level 2. Now the real fun began. Every faucet in the house opened simultaneously, sending water gushing at full pressure. The showers in both bathrooms activated, flooding the bathroom floors. Outside, the irrigation system came to life, creating waterfalls outside every window. The reaction was instantaneous panic. Sarah screamed as she heard water rushing through the walls and floors. David ran to the bathroom and found water pouring from every fixture. The shower, the sink, even the toilet tank was overflowing. The sound of rushing water was everywhere, creating an overwhelming cacophony that made communication nearly impossible. "Turn off the main water!" David shouted, but his voice was barely audible over the sound of water gushing from dozens of sources throughout the house. Through the cameras, I watched David's father stumbling through the guest room, his pajamas already soaked, trying to find the source of the water that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. His wife was crying, clutching their suitcase as if it could somehow protect them from whatever was happening. But the system wasn't finished. At exactly 12:11 a.m., 10 minutes after activation, it escalated to maximum level. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Every system Marcus and I had installed activated simultaneously, creating what could only be described as a technological nightmare. The strobe lights shifted into full intensity, flashing at frequencies designed to cause maximum disorientation. The entire house became a disco of chaos, with lights pulsing so rapidly that normal vision became impossible. I watched through the infrared cameras as the 5 intruders stumbled around like blind people. Their hands stretched out in front of them. The sound system unleashed its full arsenal. My recorded voice began echoing from every room. "Why are you in my house? You are not welcome here. Get out! Get out! Get out!" But these weren't the only sounds. Animal noises mixed with my voice. Growling, screeching, sounds that seemed to come from no identifiable source. Marcus had also programmed in subliminal frequencies that created feelings of unease and panic, even when people couldn't consciously identify why they felt afraid. The holographic projectors activated, sending shadowy figures racing across every wall. From the cameras, I could see the intruders looking around in terror as human-shaped shadows seemed to be running through the house, appearing in doorways and windows before vanishing again. And through it all, water continued pouring from every possible source. The irrigation system outside was creating sheets of water down every window, making it impossible to see outside. Inside, the floors were flooding, and the sound of rushing water mixed with the strobing lights and terrifying sounds to create complete sensory overload. Sarah was the first to break. I watched her stumble out of the master bedroom, screaming hysterically as she crashed into walls, unable to see properly due to the strobing lights. "David!" she screamed. "Something's wrong with the house. We have to get out!" David's parents were in even worse shape. The elderly couple was clinging to each other in the guest room, completely overwhelmed by the sensory assault. David's mother appeared to be having some kind of panic attack, gasping for breath while his father tried to guide her toward what he hoped was the door. The young woman in the living room was crouched behind the couch, covering her ears and sobbing. The combination of sounds, lights, and flooding had reduced her to a terrified child, but David himself was trying to fight back. I watched with admiration and frustration as he attempted to maintain some semblance of control, shouting orders that no one could hear over the cacophony. He was moving through the house methodically, trying to find circuit breakers or water shutoffs, determined to stop whatever was happening. That's when I activated nightmare mode. I hadn't planned to use Marcus's most extreme setting, but watching David's stubborn refusal to admit defeat triggered something primal in me. This man had invaded my home, planned to steal my property, and was now trying to assert dominance in my own house. Nightmare mode took everything that was already happening and amplified it beyond human tolerance. The strobe lights began flashing in patterns specifically designed to trigger claustrophobia and panic. My voice recordings began playing backwards, creating sounds that were recognizably human but completely incomprehensible, like demonic incantations echoing from every surface. The shadow projections changed from simple moving figures to complex, threatening shapes, forms that looked almost human, but wrong somehow, moving in ways that defied physics and logic. Marcus had programmed these projections based on research into primal human fears, shapes that triggered deep instinctual terror. The water systems reached maximum chaos. Not only were all fixtures running at full pressure, but Marcus had installed additional nozzles that created spraying, misting effects. The entire house became a combination flood and storm, with water coming from directions that seemed impossible. And then there were the subsonic frequencies. Marcus had warned me about these. Sounds below the range of human hearing that nevertheless had profound psychological effects. They created feelings of dread, of being watched, of impending doom that had no rational explanation. The effect on the intruders was immediate and complete. David abandoned his attempts at problem-solving and began screaming for everyone to get out. Sarah was crawling on her hands and knees, unable to stand due to the disorienting effects of the strobing lights. David's parents were both crying, clinging to each other as they stumbled toward what they hoped was an exit. The young woman had stopped sobbing and gone completely silent, curled in a fetal position behind the couch. For a moment, I worried that nightmare mode might be too much, but then I saw her moving, still conscious and responsive, just completely overwhelmed. It took them 43 minutes to escape the house. 43 minutes of technological hell that I watched with a mixture of satisfaction and amazement. They stumbled into walls, fell over furniture, and crashed into each other in their panic. The water made every surface slippery, and the strobing lights made navigation nearly impossible. When they finally burst through the front door into the cool night air, they looked like refugees from a disaster zone. All five were soaked, disoriented, and shaking. David's mother was hyperventilating, and his father was supporting her as she struggled to walk. Sarah's carefully styled hair was plastered to her head, and her expensive pajamas were ruined. But the most satisfying sight was David himself. The confident, arrogant man who had blocked my entry to my own home just weeks ago was now stumbling and shaking, looking over his shoulder at the house as if it might follow him. Through the outdoor cameras, I watched them reach their cars. David's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get his key in the ignition. Sarah was in the passenger seat, still crying and looking back at the house with an expression of pure terror. As soon as their cars left the driveway, I deactivated all systems. The house immediately returned to normal. Lights steady, water stopped, silence restored. Anyone who arrived now would find a perfectly ordinary vacation home with no signs of what had just occurred. I sat back in my Boston apartment, watching the empty, peaceful villa through the cameras, and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I had experienced in years. They had learned what it meant to be truly unwelcome. They had experienced what it felt like to have no control, no power, no ability to impose their will on a situation. For the first time since Margaret's death, I felt like myself again. My phone rang at 7:23 a.m. the next morning. I was still in bed, having stayed up until nearly 3 a.m. watching the aftermath of the previous night's events through the villa's cameras. The property had returned to its peaceful, normal state, with only some wet floors and displaced furniture as evidence of what had occurred. "Dad!" Sarah's voice exploded through the phone before I could even say hello. "What did you do?" I took a sip of the coffee I had prepared, settling back into my pillows with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. "Good morning, Sarah. I hope you had a pleasant evening at the lake." Don't you dare play innocent with me. You did something to that house. You tried to kill us. Kill you? I replied calmly. Sarah, I have no idea what you're talking about. I've been in Boston all evening. Are you feeling all right? You sound upset. The house went crazy. Water everywhere, lights flashing, voices in the walls. David's mother had to go to the emergency room. She's having panic attacks. I felt a small pang of concern about the elderly woman, but it was quickly overridden by my anger at their presumptuousness. That sounds terrible, dear. Perhaps there was some kind of electrical malfunction? Old houses can have unpredictable problems, especially when people use them without the owner's knowledge or permission. You know we were there. You planned this whole thing. Sarah, I explicitly told you that you were not welcome at the villa. If you chose to ignore that and illegally enter my property, well, I suppose you'll have to deal with whatever consequences arise from trespassing. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had changed from hysterical to coldly threatening, a tone I had never heard from her before. Dad, I don't know how you did it, but I know you're responsible. And this isn't over. You can't treat your family this way. Actually, Sarah, I can treat trespassers on my property any way I see fit within the bounds of the law. And I would strongly advise you never to set foot on my property again without explicit written permission. You're going to regret this, she said, and hung up. Over the next few hours, I received calls from David, David's father, and even the young woman who had been with them, apparently David's sister, Lisa. Each call followed the same pattern: accusations, demands for explanations, and threats of legal action. David was particularly aggressive. You could have killed someone last night. My mother is traumatized. We're going to sue you for everything you have. David, I replied calmly. You unlawfully entered my property using an illegally copied key. You brought multiple people to my home without permission and planned to steal it from me. If anyone should be concerned about legal action, it's you. We weren't stealing anything. Sarah said we could use the house. Sarah has no legal authority to give anyone permission to use my property. You committed breaking and entering, trespassing, and conspiracy to commit theft. I suggest you consult with a lawyer before making any more threats. The most interesting call came from David's father, who sounded shaken but more rational than the others. Mr. Sullivan, I want to apologize for last night. I had no idea we didn't have permission to be there. David told us you had agreed to give us the house. Mr. Peterson, I appreciate your apology, but I want to be very clear. I never agreed to give anyone my house. Your son and my daughter have been planning to steal my property, and they used you and your wife as pawns in their scheme. I didn't know. David said you were elderly and didn't use the house anymore, that you wanted it to go to family who would appreciate it. Mr. Peterson, I'm 62 years old in excellent health, and I use that house regularly. Your son has been lying to you. After that conversation, I began to understand the full scope of Sarah and David's manipulation. They hadn't just been planning to steal my house. They had been using David's parents' dreams of a retirement home to justify their actions to themselves and to manipulate the older couple into supporting their scheme. 3 days passed in relative quiet. I had expected more calls, more threats, but instead, there was an ominous silence. Then, on Tuesday evening, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Sarah and David standing in the hallway of my apartment building. Sarah was holding a folder of documents, and David had his arms crossed in an aggressive stance. They had come for a confrontation. I opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. What do you want? We need to talk, Sarah said, her voice controlled but with an underlying current of barely contained rage. In person. I don't think that's necessary. We've said everything we need to say. Dad, open the door. We're not leaving until we resolve this. Something in her tone made me realize that this wasn't a request. They were prepared to stay in my hallway, potentially causing a scene that would involve my neighbors and building management. Reluctantly, I removed the chain and stepped back to let them in. They entered my apartment like invading generals, David immediately taking up a position near the window as if to block any escape route, while Sarah sat down at my dining table and spread out her documents. Dad, we've been to a lawyer, she began, her voice taking on the condescending tone I had grown to hate. And we've learned some interesting things about elder abuse and mental competency. My blood ran cold. What are you talking about? David stepped forward. We're talking about the fact that what you did to us at the house shows clear signs of mental instability. No rational person would set up elaborate traps to terrorize their own family. Sarah opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. We've spoken with Dr. Harrison about your behavior since Mom died. He agrees that you've been showing signs of depression, isolation, and now paranoid delusions. Dr. Harrison was the physician Sarah had insisted I see after Margaret's death. I had gone to humor her, but had stopped the sessions when I realized he was reporting everything I said back to Sarah. "These are papers for a psychological evaluation," Sarah continued. "And if that evaluation shows what we think it will show, we can have you declared mentally incompetent. Then all your assets, including the villa, would be placed under my guardianship." The audacity of their plan left me speechless for a moment. They were attempting to use the legal system to steal my property by having me declared mentally unfit. "You can't be serious," I finally managed to say. "We're completely serious," David replied. "What you did to us was the act of a disturbed person. No jury would believe that a rational man would set up a haunted house to scare his own daughter." Sarah leaned forward, her expression a mixture of false concern and real threat. "Dad, you can make this easy on yourself. Sign over the villa to David's parents voluntarily, and we'll forget about the mental competency evaluation. Keep fighting us, and we'll have you declared unfit and take everything." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock Margaret had given me for our 25th anniversary. I looked at my daughter, this woman who had grown in Margaret's womb, whom I had taught to ride a bicycle, whose college education I had paid for, whose wedding I had walked her down the aisle at, and realized that she had become a stranger capable of destroying me without remorse. "Get out," I said quietly. "Dad, be reasonable. This is your chance to—" "Get out!" I shouted, standing up so abruptly that my chair fell backward. "Get out of my home!" Sarah and David exchanged glances, and I saw something like satisfaction pass between them. They had gotten the reaction they wanted. They could now claim I was unstable, unpredictable, possibly dangerous. "We'll be in touch, Dad," Sarah said, gathering her documents. "Think carefully about our offer. It's the best deal you're going to get." As they left, David paused at the door. "You know, Bob, you really should have just given us the house when we asked nicely. Now it's going to be much harder on everyone." After they were gone, I sat in my apartment feeling like the walls were closing in around me. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt genuinely afraid. They had a plan, legal documentation, and professional support for their scheme to have me declared incompetent. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, I realized something important. They had made a crucial mistake. They had assumed that my technological trap at the villa was the desperate act of a confused old man. They had no idea that it was actually the carefully planned strategy of a retired engineer with decades of problem-solving experience and a very intelligent ally. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "We need to talk," I said. "They're trying to take everything, and we need to be smarter than they are." "I was wondering when they'd escalate," Marcus replied. "Don't worry, Bob, we're not done yet. In fact, I think it's time for phase 2 of our plan." "Phase 2? "Oh, yes. What we did at the villa was just the beginning. If they want to play legal games, we're going to give them a show they'll never forget." Marcus arrived at my Boston apartment the next morning with his laptop and a grim expression that told me he had been working all night. "Bob, we need to move fast. I did some research on this Dr. Harrison and the legal strategy they're pursuing." He opened his laptop and showed me what he had discovered. "The good news is that having someone declared mentally incompetent is actually much harder than they think, especially when that person is clearly functional and has been managing their own affairs successfully. The bad news is that they can cause you a lot of trouble and expense in the process." "What do you mean?" "They can force you into court-ordered psychological evaluations, freeze your assets during the proceedings, and basically make your life hell for months while the legal system sorts everything out. Even if you win in the end, the process could cost you tens of thousands of dollars and months of stress." I felt my heart sink. So they might actually succeed? Not if we're smarter than they are. Marcus smiled that mischievous smile I had come to associate with his best ideas. "But we need to make them overplay their hand. And I think I know exactly how to do it." He explained his plan, and I realized why he had been working all night. It was brilliant, risky, and completely legal. Exactly the kind of strategy that would turn their scheme against them. The first step was to contact Harold Mitchell immediately. When I explained the situation, Harold was furious. "Bob, this is exactly why we set up the trust and the protective documents. Sarah has no legal standing to challenge your mental competency without substantial evidence of actual incapacity. And the psychological trap you set at your own property actually demonstrates planning, foresight, and technical competence. Hardly signs of mental deterioration. But can they still cause problems? They can try, but I'm going to file preemptive motions that will make their lives very difficult if they pursue this course. More importantly, I'm going to accelerate the trust formation, By next week, the villa will be legally protected in ways that make their scheme impossible. Harold paused. But Bob, I have to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that this will permanently destroy your relationship with Sarah? I thought about Margaret, about the promises I had made at her bedside, about the daughter we had raised together. Then I thought about the cold, calculating woman who had sat at my dining table threatening to have me declared insane so she could steal my property. Harold, I think Sarah destroyed our relationship when she decided I was worth more to her as an incompetent victim than as a living father. The second part of Marcus's plan was more elaborate. We're going to give them exactly what they want, he explained. They want evidence that you're mentally unstable. We're going to provide so much evidence that they'll be forced to act on it. I don't understand. We're going to make you appear to be the perfect target for their scheme. Confused, isolated, and making increasingly irrational decisions about your property. They'll become so confident in their plan that they'll make mistakes. Over the next week, Marcus and I implemented what he called Operation Overconfidence. I began making subtle changes to my behavior that would be reported back to Sarah through the network of family, friends, and neighbors who had been keeping her informed about my activities. I started going to the grocery store at odd hours and buying unusual combinations of items, things that would seem strange to casual observers, but were actually components of Marcus's latest technological improvements to the villa. I made appointments with multiple real estate agents, ostensibly to get appraisals of the villa, but actually to create a paper trail that would suggest I was confused about my property's value and considering selling it. Most importantly, I began making phone calls to Sarah that were carefully designed to sound like the ramblings of a confused elderly man. Sarah, dear, I've been thinking about what you said about the villa. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am too old to handle such a big property. I could hear the excitement in her voice as she took notes. Dad, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. David and I just want what's best for you. I've been having some problems with the house lately. Strange noises, water problems. I think there might be something wrong with it. Oh, Dad, that's exactly what we were worried about. An old house like that needs constant maintenance. It's really too much for someone your age. These conversations continued for a week, with me gradually seeming more confused and more willing to consider giving up the villa. Meanwhile, Marcus was installing the final components of what he called Phase 2 of our technological fortress. This time, we're not just defending your property, he explained as he showed me the new systems. We're going to gather evidence of their illegal activities and make sure they can never threaten you again. The new equipment included ultra-high-definition cameras with facial recognition software, audio recording systems that could isolate and enhance individual voices even in crowded rooms, and what Marcus called evidential logging, systems that would create legally admissible documentation of everything that happened on the property. When they come back, and they will come back, we'll have them dead to rights on criminal charges, breaking and entering, trespassing, conspiracy to commit fraud, and probably a few other charges once we see what they actually do. The bait worked perfectly. On Friday evening, I received a call from Sarah that I had been expecting. Dad, David, and I have been talking, and we think we should go to the villa this weekend to assess what repairs need to be done before we transfer ownership to his parents. Oh, that sounds like a good idea, dear. I've been so confused about all the problems with the house. Maybe you can figure out what's wrong. We'll take care of everything, Dad. You don't need to worry about it anymore. That evening, I drove to Vermont and met Marcus at his house. We spent the night monitoring the villa through our improved surveillance system, waiting for Sarah and David to make their move. They arrived Saturday afternoon, but this time they weren't alone. They had brought 2 other people, a man in a suit who was clearly some kind of professional, possibly the lawyer they had mentioned, and a woman with a camera who appeared to be documenting everything. They're building a case, Marcus observed as we watched them systematically photograph the interior of the villa. They want to document the evidence of your mental instability. We watched as Sarah pointed out various aspects of the house to the suit, clearly explaining her version of events. Through the audio system, we could hear fragments of their conversation, elaborate traps, paranoid behavior, clear signs of dementia. But then David made the mistake we had been hoping for. He produced a key and began showing the others how he could access the house whenever he wanted. We've been using the place regularly, he said to the suit. My father-in-law gave us permission, but then he got confused and tried to lock us out. That's perjury, Marcus said quietly. He just lied to what appears to be a legal professional about your giving them permission. The woman with the camera was documenting everything, taking pictures of rooms, furniture, and particularly the areas where our previous technological systems had been installed. They were clearly trying to find evidence of the elaborate traps Sarah had described. What they didn't know was that Marcus had removed all the obvious equipment, and replaced it with invisible systems. The new cameras were microscopic, the audio equipment was built into the walls themselves, and the recording systems were completely undetectable. For 3 hours, we watched and recorded as Sarah, David, and their associates systematically built a case against me based on lies, misrepresentations, and illegal trespassing. They were so confident in their plan that they made no effort to hide their true intentions. "We should have enough evidence to take over his assets within a month," the suit said as they prepared to leave. "The psychological evaluation will be just a formality once we present all this documentation." After they left, Marcus and I spent the evening reviewing the recordings and preparing our counterstrike. What they had handed us was better than we could have hoped for. Clear evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and multiple counts of criminal trespassing. But the masterstroke came from Harold Mitchell, who called Sunday morning with news that changed everything. "Bob, the trust is finalized, and I've added a clause that I think you're going to appreciate. As of yesterday, the villa is no longer your personal property. It belongs to the Margaret Sullivan Memorial Trust, of which you are the sole living beneficiary." What does that mean practically? It means that even if Sarah somehow succeeded in having you declared incompetent, which she can't, she would have no claim to the villa. The trust is managed by an independent board of trustees, and the villa can only be inherited by the specific beneficiaries named in the trust documents. "Who are the beneficiaries?" Harold chuckled. "Well, that's the beautiful part. After your death, the villa goes to the Lake Serenity Environmental Preserve, a conservation organization that will maintain it as a nature center in Margaret's memory. Sarah gets absolutely nothing." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. So all their scheming has been for nothing? Completely pointless. But Bob, there's more. I've also been in contact with the district attorney's office about the evidence Marcus gathered. They're very interested in pursuing criminal charges against Sarah and David. Monday morning, I called Sarah and asked her to come to my apartment for what I told her would be my final decision about the villa. She arrived within an hour, accompanied by David and the same lawyer they had brought to the villa. They were clearly expecting my surrender. "Dad, I'm so proud of you for making the mature decision," Sarah began as soon as she sat down. "David's parents are going to love the villa. Actually, Sarah, I have something different to tell you." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder of documents. "These are for you." She opened the folder eagerly, expecting to see property transfer documents. Instead, her face went white as she read the first page. "What is this?" "Those are copies of legal documents showing that the villa now belongs to the Margaret Sullivan Memorial Trust. You have no claim to it, now or ever." David grabbed the papers from her hands, scanning them quickly. "This can't be legal. You can't just give away property to avoid family obligations." "Actually, I can, and I have. The villa will be preserved as a nature center in Margaret's memory after my death. Your scheming has been for nothing." Sarah's facade of concern finally cracked completely. "You spiteful old bastard, we're still going to have you declared incompetent. You can't stop us." "Actually, I can." I pulled out another folder. "These are recordings and video documentation of your illegal activities at the villa over the past month. Breaking and entering, trespassing, conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury to a legal professional." The lawyer, who I now realized was probably not as legitimate as he had appeared, started backing toward the door. "I don't know anything about illegal activities. I was told I was documenting legitimate family concerns." "Mr. Crawford," I said, reading his name from Marcus's research, "you might want to consult with your own attorney. Conspiracy to commit fraud is a serious federal crime." Sarah was staring at me as if she had never seen me before. "You're not the confused old man we thought you were." "No, Sarah. I'm a retired civil engineer who spent 30 years solving complex problems. Did you really think I wouldn't be able to outmaneuver a spoiled daughter and her incompetent husband?" David was red-faced with rage. "This isn't over, old man." "Actually, it is." I stood up and walked to the door, opening it wide. "You're no longer welcome in my home, and you're no longer welcome in my life. If you come near me or my property again, you'll be arrested." After they left, I sat in my apartment feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. I had won completely. My property was protected, my independence was secure, and Sarah could never threaten me again. But I had also lost my daughter forever. That weekend, I drove to the villa alone for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Marcus had removed all the technological systems, returning the house to its original peaceful state. I sat on the porch swing where Margaret and I had spent so many evenings, watching the sunset over Lake Serenity. For the first time in 3 years, I felt truly at peace. The villa would survive, protected forever in Margaret's memory. Sarah had learned that I was not the helpless victim she had imagined, and I had rediscovered the strength and dignity that grief had temporarily stolen from me. 6 months later, I received a letter from Sarah. She and David were getting divorced, and she was facing criminal charges related to the fraud conspiracy. David's parents had disowned him when they learned the truth about his lies. The lawyer, Crawford, had been disbarred. Sarah's letter was not an apology, but a final attempt at manipulation. She claimed to be sorry, said she had learned her lesson, and asked if we could start over as father and daughter. I wrote back a single sentence. You made your choice when you decided to treat me as an enemy rather than as your father. Today, I spend my weekends at the villa, working in Margaret's garden and preparing the property for its eventual transition to the nature preserve. I've made friends with other lake residents, including Marcus, who has become like a son to me. Sometimes I think about Sarah and wonder if there was another way this could have ended. But then I remember the cold calculation in her eyes when she threatened to have me declared insane, and I know that I made the only choice that preserved my dignity and honored Margaret's memory. The villa sits peacefully by the lake, just as it always has. But now it's truly safe, protected not just by technology, but by legal instruments that ensure it will serve its highest purpose. As a living memorial to the love Margaret and I shared, and as a place where future generations can experience the peace and beauty we found there together. I learned that standing up for yourself is never too late, that family members who treat you as an enemy don't deserve the privileges of family, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be a victim. Margaret would be proud.